Imp and Ogre. My name's Paul.
This is Ryan.
Today we are talking about the Demon God's Fane.
The Demon God's Fane, written by Monte Cook. This is a sword and sorcery adventure, which is basically a 3rd edition D&D compatible adventure. It was originally published in 2003. It's designed for mid-level adventurers. In the little preamble to it,
Mid-level, isn't it 14th to 15th level PCs?
okay, mid to high level,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, I guess it's not mid-level. It's 14, 15.
It's high-end, right?
High-end adventure, yeah. I don't know, I wrote mid-level. It sounds like it was designed to illustrate that high-level play can still be
Difficult.
fun, difficult. I don't
Challenging?
know. Reading this adventure felt like just a standard, normal adventure.
And the ending I hated.
Time travel?
No, not the time travel part of it. That, like, winning wasn't winning and failing could be better. And, it's like, we'll get to it when we get to it. But
all right, so the main gist of this adventure is that the PCs get involved investigating some murders and end up discovering that the source is this demonic taint that originated from a long sealed and forgotten evil temple, and they must enter the temple, defeat its inhabitants, and then it turns out they have to alter the past so the evil is never created in the first place. I guess the taint plaguey thing never gets made in the first place, which I have some issues with, but we'll get to that eventually. General impressions.
I think the idea of the umbral taint that they call it, the demonic virus, is like a really cool concept, and that these demons have long since lost their bodies, but their evil has persisted and it infects people and makes them do terrible things, and sort of has like a semi-sentience to it. That was a cool plot idea. The dungeon itself I didn't quite care for that much. I don't think there's anything in this that challenges 15th and 14th level PCs in a way that you'd go like, oh, we're back, right? Like, and I thought the ending was just so unrewarding that I would feel cheated as a player if you got to the end and you're like, these are our decisions. And then they provide also, in the end, they're like, oh, if the players didn't do what they wanted, you could give them another chance to learn how to time travel and go back and try again. It's like, okay, well, boo, exactly. So overall, I think the adventure's fine. It's a good adventure. You can run and play through it. I think there's cool ideas, but I think it falls short on a lot of things. I
agree with pretty much your assessment there. The main threat of the adventure, the plaguey umbral taint thingy, is great. The spreading demonic taint possession as a virus is a cool idea. I'm actually running a Pathfinder adventure right now that the players are trying to summon a demonic taint as they are evil in that particular campaign. So it's a neat concept. I don't think they did enough with it in this adventure, and a lot of the stuff that I'm going to suggest for modifying it is all about really leaning into that cool idea, right? And it isn't the forefront enough, in my opinion. I felt that too much of the adventure dealt with sort of the history of the area and the demon god whose name I didn't even write down because it was all consonants.
I don't know. I just kept calling the main druid or wizard guy Enchilada.
Enchiridian?
Enchiladas.
So I didn't care for the way it was structured. I think the main idea is super cool. Beyond that, I was kind of lukewarm on it. It's like, not to damn this adventure with faint praise, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it wasn't bad. It wouldn't be...
For the claims that they made at the beginning, like, this is going to be great. You're going to get why you can adventure at level 14 and 15. You're just doing an investigation, a dungeon, and then like a lackluster final encounter where you don't even have to do anything in.
Well, that was sort of one of my major complaints with it, and I probably wrote it somewhere. But it didn't feel like a high-level adventure.
It felt like an opening
it felt like you could just lower the monster power level and run this for any particular character level.
Like, unless a high level adventure means being like you're entering a large structure, you know, like you could just make it into a tiny temple, and this could be a first level adventure scaled down, right?
Yeah, I don't even know that you need to do that, because it's sort of assumed that the players are going to heal anyways.
Yeah.
Right? Like leave and rest. Like there's no real explicit time constraint on them. I mean, you could just fill it with undead and run it for like third level PCs, and it would be totally fine. Also, the time travel resolution, I hated. I don't like time travel because it creates paradoxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that the players will really appreciate it so much.
Well, it's just a dumb mechanic in the end. Like, I don't know, through the lore, speaking to the Graven Ones, which is the faction that you interact in this, and that, like, you find out that Enchilodius, or whatever his name is, that if he would have done nothing, would have been better than doing what he did, which was sealing the evil in the temple.
I don't know that it's ever explicitly stated anywhere in there. Right? It seems like reading this that the players themselves are supposed to come to the conclusion that if the temple hadn't have been sealed, it would be fine.
Yeah.
Right? Because, like, it says in the DM preamble, if you will, that basically by the time this holy warrior used his miracle to seal the temple, the battle was already over. Like, they basically won already, so you should just let them all leave. But there's no way that the guy or any of the other combatants at the time...
How would you ever... They would never know that.
Yeah.
You know? It's not like they sent them a message to be like, we're leaving now, guys. You did your job.
It's not like all the demons are saying, run away, right? Like, when he used his miracle, he was in a life or death battle with a Baelor or something like that. So he would never know. Even now, nobody would necessarily know that, right? It's not like some historian can be like, oh, yeah, this thing happened 700 years ago, and we know that things would be better if they hadn't used it. Like, it's mostly the players are supposed to figure it out themselves, right? So I think that it's important for the players to know the nature of the umbral taint.
Yep.
Right? That this was caused by demons being locked up for too long, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because there's other demons in the place still that are perfectly fine.
Yep.
Right? So I think you got to sort of come up with your own sort of sci-fi magic-y excuse that makes a little bit more sense. Like, but it needs to be clear to the players that this virus is the result of these demons being trapped, sealed up for so long. Like
right.
That aspect needs to be clear, whatever sort of mumbo jumbo you use to explain it. And then the players themselves need to sort of put the pieces together that, oh, if this was caused because they were all sealed up for so long, what if they were never sealed up? All right, so that resolution is up to the PCs to figure out. And it's not a big deal if they don't.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not the end of the world if they can't figure that particular point out. But
yeah, hooks, I guess.
Eh.
We're also very vague. Like, they suggested maybe having ties to the area, so you would go back there at some point, or you were you're like searching for something, and you find out that it's in the Graven One's library, so there's a reason to go back to this area of Golden Lake, and then once you're at Golden Lake, there whatever murders are happening. So it's like, you know, it's very for the power level of the PCs that you're dealing with, it's like very like, why would you be interested in murders in a town? It's
way under their pay scale.
Yeah,
at that point, right? Because like that's the whole point. Like all of the written brain's not working now. Hooks are about getting the players to this area so they just suddenly become involved in investigating random murders. right? Which the players will, just because they're there to play D&D, and you as the DM are saying, this is what you need to do to D&D today, right? But
Yeah.
right, well, that's basically it. This is definitely an adventure. Like, well, we're here to play D&D, so it doesn't matter if it doesn't make that much sense. This is what we're
just
doing.
do it. Yeah.
But yeah, it's super not satisfying.
No, I agree.
If I was running this, which I probably wouldn't,
Yeah.
but if I was running it, the first thing I would do is I would make the Umbral Taint way more of a threat.
Yeah.
It is the main focus of this adventure, okay? And the players should be trying to backtrack it to its source.
Well, it's so easily spread that, like, you know, what is it? You have to be within like 4 rounds or something.
Yeah.
Like something. It's a short duration of time. So you'd think like once this was out in the world, it would, you know, the whole town would be tainted, right? Like everything would be evil, but it's not the case.
Yeah.
It's like one person is, and they're murdering people. And
Well, that's why I think it needs to be more of a threat, because as written, one fisherman gets it.
yep,
He spreads it to some wizard,
yep,
and then she spreads it to 2 other people,
yep.
who the players never even find out are infected.
No, and they just say like this should be a problem later in your adventure.
Yeah.
Which they're at the Graven One's temple. They would be infecting everybody there because it's just, you don't have to do anything to spread the infection. You have to just be in the presence of them for a duration of time. So there would be no way to know who's infected because the NPCs, or it's as written, the people that are infected will not interact because they understand the power level of the PCs. So they know that their intent is to spread the plague, which they don't do.
So that's why if I was doing this adventure, the plague would be the hook, right? People should be coming down with this. Violence should be spreading to multiple places, and people should be like the knowledge of this being a problem should be widespread.
Yeah.
So that's what should bring the players involved into this, right? They're high-level PCs. Maybe if one of them's a magic user, then maybe the church calls them in, right? Like a patron calls them in to figure this out. And they need to find the source of the infection and try to figure out how to stop it, right? Then, like obviously a bunch of the other hooks suggest, you just use high-level magic to get all the clues that you need.
Yeah.
Like literally that's all you need to do is you cast like a couple divination spells or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's going to point them in the direction of Golden Lake.
Yep.
And then from there, I'd probably just tweak with things that you're trying to backfill the information. Right? You know, maybe you end up going to you don't necessarily have the players involved in the actual conflicts that occur there.
Right.
You come in and you find out that the murder's already happened and they found out it was this person and the encounter at the Graven One's place already happened.
Yeah.
So you're working backwards,
right,
tracking stuff into it. So the point is you're trying to figure out who patient 0 was. And once you find out that patient 0 was this fisherman, and then there's this new island that's appeared and blah blah blah, and it was in the part of the lake that so and so used to fish all the time,
which is a good way to do it because the Umbral Taint, the more it's spread, the more vague the memory of the demon that is the Umbral Taint is. So that makes sense to, you can kind of have this reverse information gathering where the first person you encounter has a very vague recollection of the temple and things. And as you get back to patient 0, it'll be the demon effectively that would have all the information that you need to stop this again.
So you can figure, I think that's a more satisfying way of going about it. And that should be the whole point. And because at this point, the players know that this is a major issue, that the taint is hugely problematic, in the area in general, right? Not just in this tiny little town, right? You're not dealing on the potential of this threat.
Yeah.
Right? It's a major problem. So suddenly when the figuring out that they need to change the past to stop this from happening, that becomes a lot more important. right? I could see a situation where the players are like, no, we need to go back and kill this guy,
Yeah.
right? Which they don't actually need to do. But,
No.
You put it in the context of something like that where they really are invested in dealing with this problem because they basically have to save the world, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's at that point, that's kind of what they're doing, is they're trying to save the world, not just stop the demons that are there. We're trying to prevent it, and I think you could play it up that as they do their investigation, it becomes clear that there is no way to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That like it's out there in the world. There's nothing we can do about it. The only way to prevent this from happening is to stop it before it started.
Yeah.
And then that all kind of makes more sense, and it makes the stakes a little bit more realistic. Like in terms of like that to me is a high level threat. Right? A demon plague is going to destroy everywhere.
And it would. Like at the rate of that it spreads, and
there's nothing necessarily to stop it.
There's also nothing that protects your PCs from being infected like instantly.
No, I mean there's high level magic that you can use to cure it. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's curable.
But if all four of you are in the room with the thing at the same time for a very small duration of time, it's like, well, okay, your adventure's over.
But it's curable with like super high level magic, and there's just not enough clerics.
But once exactly. But if you're the guys supposed to be stopping the taint and all of you are infected at the same time, well, there's your high level adventure gone.
Yeah. Well, especially like you could become infected and not like tell anybody.
Yeah.
You just keep going through and just pull it at the end. As actually reading through this adventure reminded me of an old Denzel Washington movie. But I don't know if you ever watched it. It's called Fallen.
It's vaguely familiar. I think,
but the whole idea of the demon possession and moving through and like possessed people doing evil things. It reminded me of that a lot. I'm like, if you haven't seen that movie and you wanted to use some sort of conceit like that, it totally falls along that idea, right? Because if you remember in the movie, Denzel Washington is a police detective, and he's watching some serial killer that he caught and is going to be executed, and he gets executed, but then copycat murders start happening, and through his investigation he finds out that it's not actually a person, it's basically a demon.
Right.
It's possessing people and doing all of this. So it's the exact same idea from a Denzel Washington movie, if you will, but
maybe it was stolen from that.
Entirely possible. The movie probably came out in the early 2000s or late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Before his Oscar, for sure. Anyways, adventure itself, less Denzel Washington.
So I don't know if in the adventure as written, if it was meant that you stop the spread of the plague at the Graven One's library when you come there. Like, I don't know if that's supposed to be the end of it.
Well, there's the two people that are infected that the players don't know about.
Yeah.
So I think it's implied that no, but from like the two sentences in the adventure, it seems like these two other infected people, one of which is a high-level wizard and the other one's a high-level fighter, I think, is that they're supposed to cause problems for the PCs.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in my brain, I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go run amok somewhere else where there's not people that might destroy me. You know what I mean? Like that would
go just parlay with your old friends that are super high level as well and infect them. And
we'll just infect everybody in the Graven Ones.
Exactly. Because they're all like high level wizards and apprentices and acolytes and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's implied that if the players take too long, they'll come back to and find the entire town infected at that point.
Yeah.
But, which would work fine, right? Like you could just have it that every time they leave and they get back to town, more chaos is ensuing. But I prefer the idea of having the threat be more explicit versus implied. You know what I mean? Just to fully have the threat there. That
it's hard to deal with something that you can't tangibly see, I guess, especially when you're led somewhere else, right? So I don't know.
Well, as written, there's no way that they know specifically that it is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Right? You can try to show it going on through the adventure, but I think putting your players' feet to the fire from the beginning Like, there's the problem. You're trying to solve the problem. Is a better way to go about it, in my opinion.
True.
But I guess we can talk about it as written, and then I guess suggest stuff if we want to suggest more changes afterwards. But basically, as written, they come to town. And the town itself is fine. I think it's reasonably well fleshed out.
Yep.
So Golden Lake is a fishing village on the shores of a giant lake. And the lake is not natural. The lake was created by a miracle 700 years ago. And the water itself is magical in the sense that it sealed the demons inside this giant temple, and the giant temple was in the center of the valley, and due to a drought, the water has fallen in the lake, and now the top of the temple is poking out. That's how the demon essence can get out, or what have you. So when they're in town, there have been a number of murders, and the players become involved in investigating the murders.
Which is easy for them. I think at that level, you've got enough tools to... you just speak with dead, I think, with all of them. And eventually one of them says, oh, it was this guy, basically. And then you can go and confront them.
It was kind of, let's face it, a little boring. I think at high levels, investigations aren't the greatest.
Yeah.
Just due to Magic being able to deal with most of it. That being said, I think as written, it's written as a pretty good standard investigation.
Yep.
Right? Like, you could just steal the investigation process and throw it at
anything,
any level of players, because the witnesses and information they can just gather from talking to people is enough to point them in the direction of the actual culprit. Right?
I will say about the whole investigation thing that, like, so Drabat, I think, was the name of the guy that was infected. So you find out that he's the murderer, but if you detect evil on him, he's got like the sigil on him that a fireball trap will explode in his face, like detonating himself and killing it. So it's like he's got this like fail-safe built into him that if you find out too much information or use the right spell on him to find out that there's actually an evil entity attached, he just explodes. And I thought that was awesome. And that also happens again at the Graven One's temple when you're fighting the mage that's infected. But a giant snake comes out of her mouth and constricts her and kills her instead. Yeah. So it's just like
the suicide switches are pretty cool. Now, that being said, if your players were trying to be sneaky, right? If they're like, oh, let's just check on them surreptitiously in a tavern, I don't know how well your players would take it if you just like, and then a fireball goes off. Everybody in town is dead. You guys made your saving throws, so you're fine.
Yeah,
it's like a max level fireball. It's like 10d8 or whatever, 10d6, which is going to just obliterate.
That would be a bad situation. You're like, oh, there he is in the inn. You're like, Ryan, just use detect evil on him real quick. And you're like, sure, no problem. It's like, poof, just slowly back away.
But like that's literally a situation that is reasonably likely to occur.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're using like detect evil or something like that, you're not going to capture the guy and then do it.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to do it on the sly. And I could just envision a situation. And I know like my players would just be not happy. They'd feel that was unfair.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's not okay.
Yeah. For sure.
But anyways, it'll be memorable. Remember that time we blew up a tavern and killed all those people? Good times.
And then we stopped doing the adventure and the taint spread across the lands and we lost. Yeah.
And then we started a new campaign.
So after doing the investigation, you will eventually hear of the Graven Ones.
There's a direct link to it. Yeah. Basically, one of the Fisher guy managed to infect a Graven One who gave him a poison dagger, right? So and then the poison dagger has an arcane mark on it with the Graven One's name on it because reasons, and that's what sends the PCs to the Graven Ones. And the
Yeah.
Graven Ones are just an order of
Wizards.
who live nearby in a little keep.
Tattooed, leathery wizards. I don't know.
Well, I think Graven One is like a setting specific
Faction.
class. Actually, I think it's just a reskinning of something. They're lore masters, so they're
Right.
sort of a cleric slash wizard,
Ah.
smarty type people, right?
Mhm.
It's just a library, if you will, full of magic users. And you go there, and what I did like is when you go there, you step right into the middle of a
Combat encounter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you show up just as the infected wizard is attacking her colleagues, I guess. Because,
Surprise attack, yeah.
Yeah. So again, nothing super exciting is involved. I would say it's very much simply fights a magic user, a couple magic users. I think there's 2 infected like that you're dealing with, which again shouldn't be remotely difficult for players of this level. And that's it. Like, there's really no reason to send the players here other than to give them an excuse to meet the Graven Ones, who are like the local historians and can provide them with all the information necessary to actually get to the temple itself, right? Like there's no other reason for this encounter to exist.
It's yeah. I mean, like we said in the beginning, this whole the whole point of coming here is investigation, so they can learn about the history of the area. But at this level, like you can just commune with your deities basically and ask about it. I'm sure they would know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like all of this information gathering stuff is just sort of made moot by the level of the players that are playing the game. And you'd think by then they'd have some sort of mastery over how they can collect information, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, it just seems like a big chunk of the adventure that's wasted.
Yeah.
I mean, and then after collecting information here where you find out about the history and the Fane, that, I mean, you go to the beach, I guess, at some point, basically whenever you decide that you go there and a demon has escaped the Fane and is attacking people. So it's, I don't know. I guess I'm just a little let down by the adventure and that they said that this would be like the reinvigoration of adventuring at this level, and it really is just, you know, simple, like very mechanically structured adventure, which is nothing wrong with it, but I was expecting something special out of it, and I didn't get that, so then I feel let down by it.
Yeah, it's nothing exciting.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's... I mean, we haven't even talked about the dungeon itself. We'll get to that in a second, but it doesn't feel like a capstone style adventure. And really, when we're talking about adventuring at like 14th, 15th, levels, you're coming to the end of your careers here, and it really should be something big and exciting. And as written, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, oh, there's murders. Oh, it's caused by demons. We'll go deal with the demons.
Mm-hmm.
Which feels like any other adventure that you run at any level. Like,
yeah.
I could use that hook at the first level, right? I just wouldn't use super scary demons.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe I wouldn't even use any demons, and they're just dealing with cultists that have summoned the plague. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you can... It doesn't feel particularly high level.
No. I mean, I guess we can just jump onto the dungeon, right? Like,
well, that's most of the adventure.
Yeah, and so there's information gathering. You find out that the Fane, the big temple, is in the middle of the lake, which is shaped like a giant demon person thing. And you start at the head and you work your way down. The dungeon itself, I think, is forgettable. Like, there's in every room a secret door.
It's a vertical dungeon.
Yeah,
which is different.
Yeah, and so there's a mechanic that gets you through to the next level, and there's also a mechanic that leads you back up through the level, which is hidden locks and levers and doors and stuff. So once your players figure out the initial, like, oh, we need to make a search to find the trap door, it's like, I think moving through the rest of the rooms becomes irrelevant at that point as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything in the dungeon itself that really stood out for me.
I got things to point out. I hated the fact that for an adventure that is supposed to, let's reinvigorate the concept of, high level play, they just use the exact same gamut of restrictions on the environment to negate all of the high level magic spells.
Yep.
It was like, oh, well, all the stone's been infused with magical stuff, so you can't cast spells on it. Oh, and you can't go into the ethereal plane because of reasons, and you can't scry with inside of it, and you can't teleport when you're inside of it because blah, 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 right?
Yep.
Like, it's the usual ridiculousness that's come up multiple times, pretty much every time we talk about high-level dungeons, that... oh, well, wizards are too good at high levels, so to make us able to play the same game at a high level, we just need to take away all their toys.
Yeah, and I hate that, and I think there's an adventure we're going to come up in the next couple of weeks that actually I think dealt with it a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, to reinvigorate your players just to take away their abilities is like the worst style of D&D at high level, I think.
I mean, I don't know why they keep creating the same problem, right? Even in 5th edition, like, they never really fixed the major issue there.
Yeah.
Is that certain spells just break the fundamental nature of the game, right? Like, it completely changes the way you play the game once you can do certain things. And this has been an ongoing problem since the beginning, right? Like, original D&D, you weren't supposed to be dungeon crawling after a certain point.
Yeah.
Right? Warriors were supposed, like, if you're a melee character, you're supposed to get, like, armies and thieves guilds and stuff like that. Like, the nature of the game was supposed to change completely.
Mm-hmm. So not just be dungeon crawling
not
PCs
just be dungeon
for your
crawling.
entire life.
Yeah. Wizards are creating spells and doing all types of cool things. You're not still adventuring past 10th level.
I think that, like, maybe the problem is people don't want to retire characters,
Yeah.
Like, that's not exciting to sit there and be like, oh, I research now, But, yeah, I mean, after 10th level, it just seems like that just ends up where it's going. You just get bored. And it's hard to do dungeons. It's hard to...
Well, you gotta... I mean, and we'll talk about this in one of the upcoming adventures that's actually in Planescape. I'm of the opinion that after a certain level, you no longer should be adventuring on the material plane.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I was making a game, I would literally have it that at 10th level, that's a different game.
Yeah.
Right? Like, at 10th level, you get recruited by your divine patron, and now you're in the heavenly host fighting in the blood war or whatever, right? Like, that you just don't get to be...
Yeah, the plights of mortal men no longer interest you.
Right? You've drawn the attention of the higher powers.
Yeah.
And you've been recruited forcibly, if necessary, to deal... Because these types of threats don't matter.
Yeah, in this grand scheme of existence in D&D, right? Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't, especially to the power level of the types of characters that we're talking about here. Like, a 15th level wizard can literally go talk to their god.
Yeah.
Like, physically plane shift, go and knock on their front door and be like, yo, Zeus, what should we do? Mm-hmm. Right? And that's a design flaw in general with the game. Like, I don't think that should ever be a thing that a character can do. Right. But we're stuck with what we have, not with what we wish it would be. But anyways, that's why you're constantly seeing, like, oh, we want to keep playing with these characters, but maintain that old feel when we were in danger of dying every single trap or what have you. And the only way you can do that is by taking away toys. Mm-hmm. And I don't like doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's it. I'm going to complain about the height of the ceilings.
Which was, how high were they?
It was 15 feet.
Oh, yeah.
So we've built a giant statue that we've hollowed out, but we want to make sure we have 15-foot ceilings everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I acknowledge that vaulted ceilings are a thing, and in medieval style dungeons, and I'm sure there's plenty of subterranean structures that have 15-foot ceilings, but I hate it. Mm-hmm. Because it's the lazy design decision is be like, oh, well, the height's never going to be a problem. Mm-hmm. right? Like, it's a general complaint I have about dungeoneering in general. Like, the variety of weapons that players are supposed to be able to use in cramped quarters is bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine trying to fight with a claymore in a 5-foot wide hallway?
Yeah, well, I think you
It's a
you
6
couldn't,
foot
right?
long weapon.
You couldn't.
You couldn't swing it. You couldn't use half of the weapons. You probably couldn't use a longsword appropriately. That's why trench fighting in World Wars, they didn't use giant swords. They used small little clubs and knives.
Yeah.
Because you can't even use your bayonet properly.
Not enough room to swing it.
There's not enough room to maneuver. Right?
I think that just goes to people not wanting to actually monitor what's going on. It's easier just to say yeah, you can swing your thing here instead of being like, no, you can't. You can't physically use it in this 4-foot crawl space. Like, you can't even poke it effectively, really. Like, how could you ever maintain enough strength and momentum to use that big of a weapon in a tunnel? You couldn't, right?
Well, it suddenly doesn't become a slashing weapon anymore.
Yeah.
You could use it as a piercing weapon.
Yeah.
Right? Or you could hold it upside down with your gauntlets and use it like a club.
Yeah.
Like actual knights used to do.
Yeah.
Right? Knights in armor fighting each other with swords weren't trying to stab each other. They'd hold their swords by the blades and try to bash their skulls in using their pommels and then their hilts, because bladed weapons don't do anything against plate armor, which is the whole point of plate armor.
Yeah.
Anyways, I know there's the fantasy and blah 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 blah, but sometimes it's things like that bug me. Even if we can just ignore everything else, it should just be cramped and dark, and we're gonna still say you can use a long bow in a tiny little
goes
spot.
into the same argument with light sources, right? That nobody,
rules exist but never get enforced.
Yeah, I think that just, it's hard to just, people will also be like, oh, you're a rule Nazi, you're so strict in the game. And it's like, well, then what's the point in playing the game if you follow any of the rules?
Well, because people like to enjoy the spirit of the game without the rule of the game. Also, when it comes down to it, is we all kind of default to playing D&D because it's the most popular one, but most people aren't actually playing D&D.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing a heavily homebrewed, modified D&D, and they'd be much happier if they were playing Dungeon World or one of the other narrative style games.
Right.
Or there's some very crunchy games out there that have ridiculous rules for combat and stuff like that, of which I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know, I can see books in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But we all sort of default to D&D, and D&D doesn't really do anything great. It's not great at narrative, it's not great at combat, it does everything okay, but because it's the popular one, everyone plays it and then tries to hack it to be more enjoyable. So I obviously fall, more on the verisimilitude style. I like it to be believable. I like my characters to have a believable reason for what they're doing. It doesn't take much to sort of break the illusion of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Reality in the fantasy sense. I get that it's wizards and all that type of stuff, but when I'm trying to envision the construction of a temple, and you have a 5-foot wide hallway, and the person's sitting there going what we really need here is we need high ceilings
everywhere.
Yeah. Just because.
And then it's just how big does the statue need to be to accommodate,
Yeah, we're also, I'm complaining about the height of the ceiling when the temple is a 250-foot tall stone statue, which is also completely ridiculous. But I'll give the rule of cool. I will ignore that.
It's funny,
but it just shows how pedantic I can be sometimes. So that kind of just irritated me for no good reason.
Is there anything in the dungeon that you want to point out before getting, I think, to the Fane's Heart is probably the...
Yeah, well, I got some things I want to talk about for sure. I did like that every single room has a blood fountain, and it has demonic blood in it. So any demon that drinks it is healed. But the cool thing is any demon that drinks the blood can communicate telepathically with anybody else that's been drinking the blood.
Yeah, someone, you have to bleed into it, and you can put a message in it. And then
that's what it was. You got to bleed into it, and someone drinks it. So
if you want to send a message, you cut yourself, you put some of your blood, and then your essence will be infused with the message, and demons that drink the blood can receive your message with a little picture of what your face looks like next to the message. I also thought that was a really cool like messenger service, but like you would never ever figure that out, I don't think.
No, I don't think. I mean, it suggested that if the players figure this out, they can use, try to deceive the demons and blah 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 blah. I'm like, probably not. But what I liked about it is it provides a plausible explanation for allowing demons to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Right. So I thought that was kind of neat. I hated how the players get into the Fane, into the temple.
With the like pincushion trap, or just
the trap was fine. So through the investigation, they figure out that this must be the statue. So they go to this island.
Yeah.
There's a stone plug in the head of the statue, so they can pull that out and they can go into it. And then there's a bit of a puzzle in the first room that involves stabbing a statue with needles and then finding an invisible floating sphere that you can open and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. So the puzzle is fine. PCs will figure it out pretty easily. At this point, some of them probably have like permanent true seeing anyways, right? But what I hated about it was, why does this entrance exist at all? Why is there an entrance with a puzzle room to get in at the head of the statue that originally was 250 feet off of the ground, and there was a main entrance at the ground level?
Why is there entrances at all? Because it says in the adventure, like, most demons don't use it. They just teleport in.
There's people. Not everybody can teleport. Like, I'll give it that. But from, like, an architectural design standpoint, you're sitting there going, like, you know what? Maybe we'll need to get in from the head one point.
Maybe the demons had, like, cousin Carl stop by occasionally.
So let's make a plug, and not an actual door, right? Like a stone plug that we have to figure out how to pull out. And then this puzzle to get into it, just in case anybody uses it. So again, this is me getting back to complaining about verisimilitude. Like, this is the type of thing where I'm like, why would a dungeon designer, like a temple designer, the architects, people building this, why would that exist there?
Mm-hmm.
Also, why is that in the head of the demon when you'd think that, like, maybe the head should include something important? Because in the design, if you're starting at the bottom, that should be the highest part of the temple. Because in the pommel of the sword of the statue is something exciting, but not in the head. The head has to be an entrance that never gets used by anybody that ever used it, except for these players that conveniently are able to use it. Like, that's the type of thing that bugs me when I'm buying an adventure, right? Like, if you're taking the time to write something to sell, this is the type of thing I don't want to have to think about, right? And granted, it's not for only me, and I'm sure most people don't care about this type of thing, but for me, when I read, like, whenever I'm reading an adventure and I'm like, why is this here? What is the point of this being here other than it makes life easier for the players?
Mm-hmm.
That's what bugs me. Because definitely this is a situation where it feels like the dungeon was designed with the intention of being like, oh, well, this would be really handy to have if we were ever submerged and we needed to have a way for players to come into this dungeon.
Yeah, and I think the things that matter to us have changed over time because we've read so many adventures now that you're like, and we've read some really good ones and some ones where you're just like, ugh, like what? Like, I remember seeing the picture of the map, and it was a statue, and I just like face palmed, I was like, this is what you decided to do. I mean, yeah.
I will say also the intro to the adventure definitely biased me towards being maybe a little bit more critical.
Yeah.
Right. When
they had big exclamations about this adventure, and it's just like they shot themselves in the foot.
Well, that this was, going to prove that you can still run high-level dungeons and they'll be challenging and exciting, and it's not any of that type of stuff. So
we're not really talking about the adventure anymore. But
I was complaining about the entrance to it. Other than that, I think it was pretty standard stuff.
Nothing exciting.
There's a lot of level appropriate encounters. There's undead and demons. A couple of fiendish whatevers.
Yeah.
There's a couple of night hags because sure, why not?
Yeah.
I liked the spiral staircase trap.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a spiral staircase that the players take from one level to the next. The trigger's in the middle of it. So they step on it. The top and bottom close up effectively. Like it becomes a spiral cage.
Mm-hmm.
And it also triggers a bunch of flesh golems to assemble. So now you're trapped in a cage being attacked by a bunch of flesh golems.
Yeah.
And I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Just from an image standpoint, that seemed pretty cool. That I liked.
I did like, I mean, there's a pair of rocks, I think, that you run into. But what I liked about it was one of them was crippled, so he could no longer perch. So he had to build his nest on the ground.
Oh, the rock.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, that just is like little things like that where they've taken something and just tweaked it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Just makes adventures interesting to me, or when you see different takes on things.
I like that. Yeah, I like the rock thing. There's a ghost of a paladin that they randomly encounter that serves solely as an exposition dump.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, let me tell you about what happened all that 700 years ago. Here, I've passed on my information. I can finally rest.
Mm-hmm.
Super inelegant. Didn't particularly care for it. It's fine, but lazy is the way I wrote it down.
Yeah.
What else is super cool in here? There's a curse. Did you the cursed lanterns? Did you pick up on that?
Mm-mm.
So there's some magic lanterns in one of the rooms, and if they interact with them, they pick them up or what have you, they become cursed. And this is a beautiful curse. Like, as much as I'm complaining about this adventure, I love this curse. So the curse is, if you have the curse, if you try to cast a spell that creates light, you have to make a will save, or you cast darkness instead.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
It's great. Like it's my kind of curse because it's not crippling.
Yeah.
Like players may not even realize that they're cursed for like multiple adventures.
Yeah.
Right? Until the next time a magic user needs to get it, right? So next time a magic user tries to cast like the standard light spell and suddenly it gets darker, they'll pick up on it. I just thought that was kind of a cute curse that I liked, and I would steal that and put that in my list of curses for future use.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do appreciate that there's like general environmental effects in here, like the unhallowed and forbiddance and protection from good, and like that it is all stuff that I appreciate because it's like promoting the theme of like an evil place.
Oh, that makes sense,
like,
right?
Yeah.
Like if it's an evil temple, it should have all that stuff.
You know, good aligned spells don't work properly, like that kind of stuff. I mean, that's, I think, good. Lead lining is something we've come across all the time to prevent teleportation, which I think is stupid. There's better ways, I think, to do teleportation traps. I mean, there are some of them in here. If you try to use it, you end up somewhere else, which I think is good, but also a DMing nightmare because now you have PCs in different parts of the dungeon, and that's trouble all the time.
I mean, it makes sense in a world where, like, you know that teleportation is a thing and lead blocks it. So yeah, let's put lead everywhere. But like, it's irritating.
And I don't think that. I mean, there's places that have no gravity. I think at this level as well, that's not interesting. You know, like PCs should be flying. Most of them, the spellcasters, right? So.
I run a game where I think they're all 13th level. The sorcerer just flies everywhere. I don't think he's walked since like level 10. It's like part of
I mean, why would you?
Yeah.
So I think the next big notable parts of the adventure for me is when you enter the Fane's heart.
I want to talk about how we get to the heart first, because that's cool, and I want to talk about the vampire briefly.
Okay. Start with the vampire, and then we can move on from there.
Sure. So the vampire, I both liked and disliked this encounter. So there's a bloodlust insane vampire, which is a cool concept, right? Basically, this was a half-orc that prayed to his demon god to not be trapped alive inside the temple. So the demon god killed him and then raised him as a vampire.
Yep.
Because now he's not trapped alive. He's trapped dead.
Yep.
Which, I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's a vampire that's never drunk blood before. So it's just been crazy bloodlust the entire time. Now, I didn't go too far down the wormhole of like how vampires are supposed to work in D&D, but there's plenty of living things in here.
Yeah.
Right? There's a bunch of half-fiend creatures, and it even specifically says that at a certain there used to the former ruler who was a lich who got killed recently used to cast create food and water.
Yeah.
So that was what was keeping everyone alive. So there's things that needed food and water that have been alive in here for 700 years that could easily have served as blood sources. Like there's trolls.
Yeah.
There's giants.
Yeah.
Which, whatever. But maybe that's why there's 15-foot ceilings. There was going to be 2 giants in here, so we needed to provide headroom for them. But so that didn't really fit. Didn't make sense. It feels like there was some editorial work that maybe missed out on that. But basically, the vampire will try to eat the PCs, but if they can't win, it suddenly like isn't crazy anymore and just like starts to negotiate and be like, "Hey, I just want to get out of here. So let's make a deal." So the PCs can literally make a deal with a vampire, which could provide future interesting things, right?
Yeah.
Like releasing a vampire from its imprisonment can potentially create something super cool, especially when the PCs could like let him know that he's not trapped anymore, right? Like all a PC sort of has to say is like, "Oh, but we got in. You can totally get out." He'd just be gone in a second. So it seems like it could be kind of an interesting encounter in general and potentially problematic in the future.
Yeah.
But then again, it doesn't really matter that much. Anything else I wanted to say about him? No. So let's talk about the Fane. Let's talk about where the big showdown is. So to get to the Fane, you have to partake in the 3 sacraments of blah blah blah, the demon god, whatever his name is. Right. So do you want to explain it, or?
I didn't even write them down. It just says you eat something or you drink something or you.
Basically, there's like a little chunk of the abyss that you get teleported to. So there's like 3 portals that you have to use throughout the dungeon. So basically, to get to the boss level, you need to go to these 3 other parts. And then there's these 3 sacraments that you need to do. None of it is particularly concerning. You have to inhale some incense. You have to eat a wafer thingy. And then I wrote it down.
Drink, inhale, and eat, isn't it?
Something like that. Okay.
But all of them do the same thing.
Well, they provide minor penalties, right? I think there's some minor ability score damage or what have you. Like none of it is actually that big of a deal. If the PCs don't atone within a week or something like that, their alignment changes to neutral. And I would argue that it should be much more severe than that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you are a divine spellcaster or a good character, paladin, whatever, if you don't perform some sort of atoning or penance, you should probably lose your spellcasting abilities.
Mm-hmm.
It should be a little bit more
punishing
yeah. For like basically taking the sacraments of a demon prince, right?
Yeah.
So you do all that. It opens up access to the Fane, and the Fane basically you jump into
time travel,
which
is so you go to the point where Enchiladas is fighting the demon something or another,
the Bailo or whatever, the former master of the temple, if you will.
And then this whole thing is
so basically let's explain the setup. So the current demon master of the area has developed a ritual to go back in time to help his boss beat this cleric-y dude so they don't get trapped.
Yeah.
And this is what you stumble into. So you get jump back in time. There's the big boss from the past fighting the hero from the past. The current fiendish guy is there about to sort of shank the cleric healer in the back. And this is the situation where the players show up in.
Yeah.
So it's this big fight where there's a bunch of different outcomes that can occur. Like your basic, I don't know, you want to
Well, the point of the thing is like, and it's described sort of in narrative once you get to this point, that like you don't need to help because he's already done this before. So if you don't want to do anything, you know you can defeat him. So the PCs would, your main priority would be the demon servant, which you should probably have no problem taking care of.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know. It's hard to determine how encounters are supposed to be. But they encourage that your PCs role play trying to convince him not to do this. And it's
not to use this miracle, not to seal the temple.
Don't like to, and during the combat. So you're trying to encourage them
10 rounds is what it is too. Sorry, there's a time pressure on this.
Which is like, I don't think there's any situation in which you would never do it. I mean, I do approve that they just provided a DC to do it because like you aren't your character, so you can't negotiate as a a master negotiator, which is fine. And I don't think the DC is that difficult at all for this level. I think it was 25, which should be reasonably easy to achieve if you have a high charisma character.
Even if you're not a charisma character, you should probably be able to get that.
So I didn't quite like that. So in conclusion, you can either reseal everything, which they call it semi-failure, I guess.
Well, the umbral taint is going to still be spreading everywhere.
Yeah.
So you lost. In my version of this adventure, you've lost if that's what happened.
So yeah, and succeeding in the adventure, to me, this is where I got frustrated, was that like if you succeed, nothing happens. So succeeding is convincing him not to use his miracle to seal the temple. In doing that, the demons leave on their own accord. You're transported back to the present. It just is remembered poorly as an area, vaguely, right? So you're just...
Well, there's no lake anymore, so the town's not there anymore.
There's no reward. There's no one will know that you ever did this. It just never existed. The taint is gone. Everything's done, right? So succeeding is nothing. Abject failure is probably the most interesting result, and where the demons win and the temple continues to thrive, and you're retransported back to the present, and the whole area is still overrun with demons, and like that seems interesting to me. But this is again, I mean, we talk about player motivation, and it's just like, why would you ever do any of this? It just doesn't make sense to me, and there's no reward for it. Which is like the motivation of PCs.
Well, you're doing the right thing. So my biggest complaint with this is that it creates a horrible time paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you go back in time, you stop the demons from say you win, you stop it from being sealed.
Yeah.
Which means there was never an umbral taint in the future.
Yep.
Which means there was nothing for you to investigate. Which means you never came here in the first place.
Yeah, so do you just wake up?
So it never happened. You no longer exist. Right?
Yeah,
right?
I guess so. Yeah.
So, and this goes for any other situations, right? Which, no, it's not how it works. So what I would recommend is that it's a one-way street.
Like you're going in knowing you're not coming out?
You're not coming out.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're the demon, that's fine too. Right? You're going to help them win. You're not trapped anymore.
Yeah.
You don't need to come back.
Yeah.
Right? So I would make the time stream a single way.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go through the portal, you're stuck there.
Yeah.
So whatever ends up happening, you're now 700 years in the past.
Yeah.
And that's where the campaign is going to continue from here on out.
Yeah.
So you give that as the option for your players. Okay, either we're going to continue on from now on,
mm-hmm.
right? You just helped the hero and you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
We can carry on with the campaign from there. Or you give them the option to go back and play in the new timeline that you created.
Yeah.
Because you've created a new timeline where your players never went to Golden Lake because Golden Lake doesn't exist.
True. Yeah.
So you can either run it as it was all a dream style and you just go back and that adventure never happened.
Yeah.
Which is super unsatisfying because that means none of the experience or anything that you found matters.
Yeah.
Or you run it continuing on in the past.
True. Which I think is a better option because your past, future selves are no longer you. Your now present is your future, right? So yeah, you've created an alternate reality.
You're now living in an alternative reality that's it's different because you've changed things, and then you can just do whatever you want.
Yeah,
and then keep with the adventure going on from there, which is how I would probably do any type of time travel stuff. It just wouldn't be, you wouldn't be able to come back.
Yeah.
because it's just too much of a headache, if you will.
Yeah, and there should be an awareness, I guess, that that's happening. I would like to mention that I think the pentagram of body parts in the Nightmare Chamber was like very cool. You know, you're like on this massive pentagram, which is effectively, I think, a portal to the abyss or some plane anyway. But it's made out of arms and legs, and if you hurt yourself, the mouths of the heads that are part of it will laugh at you in the pentagram room. And if you use true seeing, you see the tortured souls of all these people that it was part of. That was very cool thematically for me.
Well, there's some very cool thematic stuff in here, right? It's just, I think they overhyped
it.
They overpromised and underdelivered,
Yeah.
I would say. I think it's fine as an adventure. I wouldn't probably ever run it, mostly though because I don't think you should be dealing with sort of terrestrial threats at that level, like material plane threats. Like it's kind of this is not what I would normally consider to be an appropriate threat for my players at that level. You should be doing something a lot more exciting than investigating some random murders.
I guess just like the stakes aren't high enough.
I mean, I think if you switch things up and you make the Umbral Taint scarier, like the stakes can be fine.
Yeah.
Can be high enough. But I think as is, it needs a fair bit of tweaking. I think it's a perfectly solid adventure. Not super exciting, but
agree. And I don't think it's quite what they promised. I think that's about it that we have to say for this adventure.
Yeah, I'm good.
Thanks for listening. As always, get at us at the Imp and Ogre at gmail.com or on Twitter at the Imp and Ogre. YouTube comments work as well. Next week, we're going to be talking about In the Abyss, an AD&D Planescape adventure. Thanks for listening.
Bye.